In this lesson, we're going to be going over log files. And we've certainly talked about log files in the past and some of the things that you can do to generate log files. Like we talked about doing auditing under Windows and under Linux and being able to generate log files. So you've got some evidence that you may be able to use during the course of your investigation. Now, there are several other types of log files that you may become interested in. And I'm under Linux here. And again, that's just because it's a little bit easier to take quick looks at things. So I'm in the log directory on my Linux system here. And I'm actually going to go into the Apache directory because all of the logs for Apache are stored in their own directory. Now, why am I looking at Apache specifically? Well, Apache is a web server, and you may want to be able to look at log files from a web server because web servers are a pretty common point of attack. So you can see I've got several requests here, and let me just walk through a couple of these lines just to give you an idea of what we're looking at. So on the left, starting from the left-hand side, we're going to be going from the line that says 127.0.0.1. You can see I've got that, which is an IP address of a connection that was made. So apparently this system connected to itself, and on November 11th, 2012, generated an options request to this particular server. So you can see the options request. You can see what was actually requested. We got an options star, and HTTP/1.0 is the version of HTTP that is being used to generate this request. Now, in addition to 1.0, more commonly, you'll probably see 1.1. HTTP 1.1 is the current version, adds a lot of additional features on top of 1.0. And you'll see that it's Apache 2.2.22 on a Ubuntu server, and it was an internal dummy connection. Now, one advantage to looking at these types of log files is that if you've got a proxy server where web requests in an enterprise are going through this web proxy, you're going to see similar types of log files depending on the proxy you've got. So you're going to see IP addresses and requests, and maybe sometimes you'll see host names, but it's quicker to do the IP address rather than having to do a lookup on a IP address in order to generate the log file, depending on whether we've got it or not. So this type of log file you're going to run across both with web servers and also proxy servers, because a proxy server is really just a back-to-back web server where I've got a web server on one side and a client on the other side. And somebody's making a request to the web server on one side, and that proxy is turning around and making that same request on behalf of the user on the other side. So we end up with proxies having logs that look an awful lot like just web server logs. So let's take another look at another error log here, and you can see all sorts of errors. Now, errors sometimes you can look at to see whether there has been an attack going on and whether we've generated a request that's either bad or malformed in some way. In this case, it looks like we've just got some issues with PHP because we've got strict turned on, and it looks like there's a PHP file that isn't written in a way that's compatible with strict. And you can also see some use of deprecated functions as well. So you can see information here about programming mistakes or outdated programming in the cases that we looked at, but you'll also sometimes find in the error logs information about attacks that may be going on. So that's another reason for looking at log files is you want to be able to see what's happening with these applications in case you fall under attack and you need to acquire evidence in the case of prosecution, for example. You may actually want to go after the people who have perpetrated these attacks in order to hold them accountable. Now, we're looking at Apache logs. On the Windows side, IIS logs will look very similar. The difference is that we would get to them if I go to Computer Management and bring up the Computer Management console, and I'm going to go to the Event Viewer. Now, I don't happen to have IIS installed under here, but if I did, it would show up under the Event Viewer, and I could get the IIS logs that way. They are also stored in text format on the hard drive, and you could just go grab them straight from the log directory on the hard drive. So log files, again, really important for a lot of different purposes, and specifically when you're talking about servers, you really want logs in order to see whether there are attacks that are going on or whether there may be something else. You could use proxy logs, for example, for acquiring evidence of malicious use, for example, pornographic sites or gambling sites from company premises, or many other types of activities that would violate corporate or company policies. So these are just a few ways of looking at log files and a couple of examples of where you may find log files really interesting as part of your investigation activities.